Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to this MSSO webinar, Data Analysis and Query Building with Medra. My name is Suzanne Sur Shaker or Shaker, both pronunciations are correct. I will be your instructor for this webinar. And joining me is my colleague, Hannah Eaton, who is an MSSO training coordinator and will be facilitating our session today. So we'll start with some introductions and go over some housekeeping items. I am a medical officer with the Medra MSSO team based out of New Jersey on the East Coast of the United States. Prior to joining the MSSO, I spent about a little over 20 years in the industry, most of them in the world of clinical research within different functional groups, including data management, medical data coding, monitoring, drug device safety, and medical data science. So although for today's session we don't have coding exercises, we'll be posting some polling questions as we go along. For that purpose, we'll be using the Poll EV or Poll Everywhere tool. At this time, I will ask you to please log into the tool so we can get to know you a little better and to test that you can access the questions and the polls that we'll be introducing. So you can either scan the QR code or you can type the link to a browser. And note that the tool is anonymized, so it will not identify any users. If it asks you for a username, you can use Medra123. All responses will be anonymous. And every time we put a poll, the QR code will be visible on your screen in case the tool needs to be refreshed. So we'll start with a question of where are you calling from? And as the pins are coming in, just a few housekeeping items. So today's webinar is scheduled for 2 hours. It will be an introduction to data analysis and query building with Medra. We will not be going into details on the origins of Medra or how to use Medra for coding. We also won't have time to delve into standardized Medra queries or SMQs. But if you're interested in any of those topics, you'll find many webinar offerings in different languages on the medra.org website under the training menu. You can select the schedule and you'll see the lists of face-to-face offerings and webinar offerings coming up in different regions and languages and different topics, and you can select the topic of your choice. You can also simply click the calendar icon on the top right corner of the website for a quick link. For example, we will be presenting a webinar on SMQs on the 22nd of May. We do welcome you to register for that if it's a topic of interest to you. So I do see pins from different regions of the world. Not a lot of folks have yet joined the Poll EV. So if you are having difficulty accessing Poll EV, you'll see the login instructions in the pane as well, in the chat pane, or you can reach out to Hannah in the chat for assistance. But please do try to access it just to make sure that you are able to participate with us in the polls that will be coming up. And as we wait for more pins, I'm just going to show you where to find the training schedule. So like we said, we have an icon of a calendar on the top right hand of our website, medra.org. And if you click that, it will take you to the offerings. So the first tab would be the face-to-face trainings. The second tab would be the webinars, and you can select the ones that you're interested in the language that you're interested in as well. Okay, so I do see more pins have come in, and just for the purpose of time, we're going to be moving forward, but it is always wonderful to see folks from different regions of the world. It's a testament to Medra being an international standard. So I do welcome everyone who's joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time, as it may be a bit early or a bit late for some of you. So thank you for being with us today. But for the purpose of time, we're going to move on. Okay, the second poll is what roles or functions do you perform? And you can put as many as apply to your current role or previous roles even. And as a reminder, if you have questions as we go, guys, please feel free to post them in the chat as they come to you. Hannah will be monitoring the chat and she can bring them to my attention as needed or in between the major sections. Okay, so I see many folks on the call with coding functionalities and drug device safety. I see folks from regulatory authorities and data analysis folks, which is the topic for today. and some medical reviewers or safety physicians. So thank you all for joining. And this also shows that Medra plays a role in different functionalities and different teams and reflects the adaptability of Medra. So I do hope you come away today with the idea that Medra is a tool at your disposal, meant to be leveraged to best assist you with your different tasks and operations. Okay, the next question just asks about your experience with Medra. So are you new to Medra? Have you been in the world of Medra for some time now? Okay, and I do see folks from different levels of familiarity with Medra. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all. All right, so this is our general introduction slide. It talks about how Medra was developed in the 1990s under the auspices of the ICH, and that the activities of my team, the MSSO, are overseen by the ICH Medra Management Committee, which in turn is composed of representatives from both the regulatory parties as well as the industry from the ICH regions, in addition to representatives from MHRA, Health Canada, and WHO as observer. And I do like to just take a few minutes always at this juncture just to show the link between Medra and ICH. So on the medra.org website, on the very top right-hand corner, you're going to see the ICH logo. That's a quick link that takes you to the ICH website. And if you look up the ICH guidelines, you're going to see ones that are very familiar to all of you on the call today. So you have the quality guidelines, the safety, the efficacy, and then you have multidisciplinary guidelines. And under that, the first M1 guideline is Medra. So Medra truly is an ICH M1 standard, and that link on the ICH website shows the implementation status of Medra in the various ICH regions of the world. So if you're interested in the implementation status, you can retrieve it from there. All right. The second slide is our disclaimer and copyright notice. Just as Medra is owned by the ICH, the presentation we're showing you today is also owned and copyright protected to the ICH. However, with the exception of the Medra and ICH logos, you are welcome to use the presentation. You can incorporate it into your works. You can share it with colleagues, just bearing in mind that you do need to acknowledge the copyright. And if you make any modifications or translations or tweaks, to identify them and avoid any impression that those tweaks or modifications were endorsed by the ICH. The second bullet point states that this presentation is as is without warranty. And the third bullet point is not applicable because we don't have third-party material today. Our course will cover topics related to the Medra data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. So many of the guidelines that we'll be presenting today are from that document, and we'll show you where you can access it. We'll also discuss applications of Medra in data retrieval, presentation, and analysis, and demo the tools that will help you in these functionalities and how to develop queries using Medra, and even have an exercise at the end where we work together to develop a query using Medra, and then conclude with a Q&A session. So when we talk about points to consider documents, these are actually ICH endorsed guidelines. So on the very first page of the Medra data retrieval and presentation points to consider document, you'll see on the top it says this is an ICH endorsed guide for Medra users on data output. The important part about these is that they do need to be worked together with the other ICH endorsed guidelines. So the ICH has created these documents to support Medra users, both in coding as well as in data retrieval and analysis. And the one for coding is called Medra term selection, and the one for data retrieval is the one you see on the screen. So it does provide data retrieval and presentation options for both the industry and regulatory purposes, and it's recommended to be the basis for your own organization-specific guidelines for use of Medra in data retrieval and presentation. And to show you where you can access these, I'm going to go back to the Medra website. And here we are at home. There's a couple of ways that you can retrieve it. So under How to Use, if you go down to Support Documentation, you'll see the banners that are blue and banners that are gray. Banners that are blue include the ICH endorsed guidelines. So you'll see the Medra term selection, and you'll see the Medra data retrieval and presentation. And there's also a companion document for coding topics of interest, such as medication errors. You'll see more details on these in our coding webinars. There's also a Medra best practices document that's very helpful for versioning discussions. The gray banners have version-specific documents prepared by the MSSO for each version release in Medra that talks about what's new for that release, as well as introductory guide to Medra, introductory guide to SMQs, and the technical distribution file format. The second way you can reach this is by the quick link at the top under PTC for points to consider. If you click that, it takes you, this is the same spot. It's just that the blue banner will be defaulted open. Okay, so these Medra data retrieval and presentation points to consider documents, like we said, were developed by the working group of the ICH. They are updated every March along with the March release of Medra. There are complete versions in 6 different languages and condensed versions in about 9 more languages, all available on the website. So if you're more comfortable with a local language, you can select the language of choice. And they are available on the Medra website and the JMO website. And JMO stands for Japanese Maintenance Organization, because when Medra was created, it was created in English and Japanese. And the JMO is the sister company or sister organization to the MSSO, and they maintain Medra in Japanese. The topics that are covered by the data retrieval and presentation will be the ones we focus on today, especially the first group. So we'll be talking about the general principles of data retrieval and presentations in the coming slide, along with how to create queries and retrieve data in Medra. But the topics about SMQs and customized searches, those will be discussed in details in the SMQ webinar on May 22nd. Okay, so first principle is quality. And many of us have heard this often, again and again, that for good quality data output, you do need good quality data input. And when we talk about data source for purposes of data retrieval and analysis, we're not just talking about the verbatim as a source of data. We're also talking about coded data as a source of data. So high quality data output occurs when the quality of the information originally reported is maintained, along with consistent and appropriate Medra term selection in the coding process. So organizations should pursue continuous oversight of data quality. If you have source data that is legacy data from previous terminologies, such as WHOART or COSTART, you have different options of how to convert that data into Medra, and you do need to think about what the best course of action would be for your organization. So if data has been converted directly from legacy terminology to Medra, of course, sometimes the legacy terminology may not have the same level of granularity as Medra. So you may have lost some of the specificity of that verbatim. So for example, let's say your original term verbatim was gastrointestinal ischemia. And when that was coded to a legacy terminology, the option for gastrointestinal ischemia was not available, so it was coded to gastrointestinal disorder. If your source starting point is the gastrointestinal disorder, then you have already lost some of the specificity of the concept. However, if all you have is the legacy data, then you don't really have a choice. But just something to bear in mind when you're considering your options as to whether to convert data from that legacy terminology or to convert data from the original verbatim into Medra, bearing in mind whether you're going to be comparing it to additional data being collected in the future. The second major principle, again, as many of us also follow, is documentation. So, of course, organizations are encouraged to ensure organization-specific guidelines be consistent with the ICH endorsed points to consider document, and include documentation of all their processes, including which Medra version was used in the search, which search strategy methods were implemented so that they can be clear and reproducible. And of course, what's your process for version updates? So we said that best practices document is a good resource for you when you're making decisions about versioning updates. And of course, if you're creating customized Medra queries, documentation becomes very important because you want to ensure that the steps followed to create that query are clear if anybody has questions, and if there are changes in the team members, that you have that documentation available. And of course, if you want to revisit it in the future to understand what the process was that retrieved these queries. Okay, so as we delve deeper into data analysis, we're going to be talking about different levels of Medra with different jargons. So I just wanted to see if everybody is familiar with these acronyms before we proceed any further. So you're going to see the question on your screen, and I'm going to activate it. So if you're looking at these and going, I have no clue, or I don't know any of these acronyms, or maybe one or two, that's fine. You're still in the right webinar because this is an introduction to data analysis, but it would be helpful to know if folks are not familiar with them. I'll give you a quick overview of the Medra hierarchy. So the question on the screen is, what is the order of the Medra hierarchy from the lowest term to the highest term? And you can see it's 5 levels. So no matter what selection you make, it is going to be 5 levels. And if you're not sure, just pick one, please, just so that we know how many folks are familiar with these levels of Medra versus how many folks are not. And the participation is still kind of low. So I do hope folks are able to access the tool. And if you're not, the link is on the top of your screen, as well as the QR code. Okay, give it a few more seconds just to get a bit more responses coming in before we show responses. Okay, maybe these are enough, and let's see what we have. Okay, so this is very good because the majority of you do have the right response. Medra does go from LLT to PT to HLT, HLGT, and SOC. I'm going to ask a few more questions, but because we do have folks that are not familiar with these, I'm going to show you an overview of the Medra hierarchy, but let's go to the next question. Data coding. Data coding is typically performed at which Medra level? And I know folks are on the call who are not Medra coders, which is fine. This also is a good webinar for you, but just to see if folks have a general understanding, data coding is typically done at which Medra level? Okay, so let's see responses. Okay, so the majority have the LLT. Many folks also think it could be at the PT, which is interesting. So let's move on to the next question. This question says, every PT in Medra is linked to at least one primary system organ class, or primary SOC, and at least one secondary system organ class. Do you think this is a true statement or a false statement? Or if you're not sure, you can pick the I'm not sure option. Okay, so just giving folks a chance to respond, and let's see responses. Okay, so it looks like more than half say this is true. Some folks say this is false, and some folks don't know. So, okay, let's do the second last question on this poll. The primary SOC allocation is performed at which stage? So the primary system organ class allocation is performed at which stage? Is it selected by the coder when they're coding in Medra? Is it selected by folks with safety background or medical background during the safety review? Is this a predefined selection in MedDRA, or is this a selection done by the regulators? Okay, and I'm going to show responses. Okay, so about half say predefined, and then answers from all over. So, okay, so maybe this is a good time to just give you a quick overview on the MedDRA hierarchy. So MedDRA is built as a hierarchy system. It has 5 levels, and you can use MedDRA either from the top-down or bottom-up approach. They're linked vertically, and each level from the bottom is subordinate to the linked term in the level above it. So the folks who chose the LLT, PT, HLT, HLGT, and SOC were correct in that first poll. When you're coding, the level that you interact with MedDRA is the one on the bottom. It's the most granular. It's the lowest level term. You can think of MedDRA as a collection of textual codes. So it has a bunch of terms available in it. And what you're trying to do when you're coding is you're trying to select a term that already exists in MedDRA at the LLT level that is the closest match to the verbatim or your natural language term or your source term that you're trying to code to MedDRA. Now, some of these, there's almost 90,000 you see on the bottom of your screen. Some of them are very close to each other. They're called sibling LLTs. They basically convey the same medical concept. So think, for example, if you have a reporter that says the patient complained of abdominal pain, and another reporter that said the patient had tummy ache, and a third who said there was a complaint of colic. Well, they're really conveying the same medical concept of abdominal pain, but in different texts or different words. And what MedDRA does is it groups these similar medical terms together under one preferred term to convey this medical concept, and that becomes the preferred term. So one of these different LLTs that are really siblings and mean the same thing, that is repeated at the PT level. So every PT is in fact an LLT. So every PT is duplicated at the LLT level, both in text and code. And then when you go higher up in the hierarchy, you see how the numbers contract. So the largest number of terms exist at the LLT level, close to 90,000, but because some of them are very similar and they just convey the same medical concept, that number contracts to about 27,000 at the PT level. And then at the next grouping term, so once you reach the HLT or the high level term, now you're going into grouping terms. They collect similar PTs together. So PTs that are similar are collected together, and this could be based on a pathology or manifestation or physiology or function. So medically relevant. They're being grouped together at the HLT level, and you see how we go down even further number-wise. So we're about 1,800 or so HLTs. And even high-level terms, they also get grouped together in a medically significant way, maybe by anatomy or function or something like that, where it makes sense to group them together, and they become the high-level group term. And then those are grouped together under 27 system organ classes. So this gives you an idea of how MedDRA does standardization, going from LLT to PT, and then aggregation and data analysis and query signal detection as you go from the most granular to the least granular. So when you're thinking about coding, you're approaching MedDRA from the LLT level. When you're thinking about aggregation and data analysis, you're thinking of the grouping terms. So you may approach MedDRA from the top down. And I'm going to show you what these 27 groups are. So the 27 system organ classes either are collected based on organs. So you're going to see, for example, ear in there. You're going to see eye disorders. You're going to see heart disorders. They may be based on systems. So you can see blood system, the gastrointestinal system, the immune system. And there may be certain specific classifications. So you see, for example, there is infections. There is social circumstances. There are surgeries, surgical SOCs. There's investigation SOCs. So the grouping in MedDRA is intentional for the purposes of standardization and for the purposes of aggregation so that we can achieve signal detection and identification of safety issues in our data. Now, I'm going to show you examples within the browser. So let's go back to our website, and I do encourage you to click along as we go to the browser. There are, for training purposes, temporary credentials that are provided to you in the chat feature. So if you go into the chat, you're going to see at the bottom these temporary credentials. Of course, you're also welcome to use your own organization credentials to access the browser. If you're not sure what your organization credentials are, but you want to use them maybe after the webinar is done to practice what we went over, you can retrieve them under the SSA, the self-service application. So it's really very easy to follow as long as you have an email from the domain of your organization. You'll be able to retrieve these credentials. But for now, if you want, just copy and paste the credentials from the chat. And here is the link to the web-based browser. So if you just click on it on the WBB, it takes you to our online web-based browser, and you can use your temporary credentials to log in. So just to kind of give you an example of what we spoke about in terms of the hierarchy of MedDRA. So here are the 27 system organ classes that you see on the left-hand side. They each have a plus next to it that you can expand. So if I'm interested in cardiac disorders, and if I expand that, I'm going to see what types of groupings exist already under cardiac disorders. So there's arrhythmias, there's neoplasms, there's valve disorders, heart failures. So MedDRA already has grouped terms together that are relevant to each other under these type of medical concepts. If I expand them further under, for example, the arrhythmias, I'm going to see the different types of arrhythmias that MedDRA already grouped together. So you have, for example, cardiac conduction disorders versus supraventricular versus ventricular. So if I'm interested in identifying terms in MedDRA that speak to supraventricular arrhythmias, I already have a good selection in here. And if you're wondering what all these different colors mean, the legend box is up here on the top, and you can expand the legend box. And basically, if a PT has a red box, it just means that it only exists in this one system organ class. If it has a green or blue box, it means the same PT can be found in more than one system organ class. And if you wonder why that is, well, for example, here's this term, congenital supraventricular tachycardia. So yes, it is a cardiac disorder, but it's also a congenital disorder. So because it fits in both places, it belongs in both system organ classes. And if I just click on it, pay attention to this right-hand corner here in the screen. If I click on the term, on the right-hand corner of the screen, it's going to show me which are the system organ classes that this term exists in. So you'll see it exists in a congenital term, congenital system organ class, and the cardiac disorder system organ class. The one with the blue box is the one that's the primary. Now, not every term in MedDRA necessarily belongs to more than one system organ class. Like we said here, atrial flutter is a purely cardiac term, so it only exists in the cardiac disorders. But if the same medical concept can belong to more than one of the 27 categories, it does exist in MedDRA with those links to more than one system organ class. And there's really no set limit where you can't go above this. Of course, it's, most terms are not going to belong to multiple system organ classes. And that one poll that asked about whether it's true or not that there has to be a link to one primary and one secondary, that is false, because as long as you have a connection to at least one system organ class, that's the hierarchy of MedDRA. There are multiple terms in MedDRA that are multi-axial and that link to more than one system organ class. Like we said, the congenital has a link to congenital disorders as well as cardiac disorders. If it's a blue box, that means it does have more than one link, but it exists right now under the primary system organ class. So if I click on it, I see the secondary system organ class is pregnancy. So that's kind of a quick overview of multi-axiality in Medra. And in terms of the rules of assigning, well, if the same term can belong to more than one system organ class, then who makes the decision of which one is primary? That was another poll. That is hardwired, predefined in the Medra hierarchy. So when this term is entered into Medra, the IMO team, the International Medical Officers with the MSSO, will decide which part of the hierarchy it belongs under as a primary link and which part of the hierarchy it can connect to as a secondary link if applicable. And that becomes very helpful when you're doing your data analysis, because if you are interested in cardiac disorders, then you can look for this term under cardiac system organ class in your output. But sometimes the link is secondary. So you can also leverage the secondary system organ class in your analysis to see it even if the link is secondary. And we're going to be talking more about that as we progress in the slides. But I wanted to show this kind of overview. So let me go back to the slide that follows, and this is where we stopped. With that kind of overview of how Medra was built with a certain hierarchy to address the needs of data standardization and data aggregation and signal detection, that's what makes Medra a standard, an ICH standard. So of course, the next principle will be telling you, do not change Medra. If you change Medra, then you are no longer using the ICH standard. And of course, everybody else in terms of stakeholders and partners that you're working with, they are using the standard Medra. So if you made a change to the standard system organ class in any of your data and you submitted that to the regulator, the regulator will not be able to adequately compare your data in terms of safety against maybe another manufacturer with the same type of product, or against different products that you're submitting for, or against time, in previous data outputs. So do not make ad hoc structural changes to Medra. Do not change the primary system organ class allocation. This is a very important point. However, having said that, if you feel that there is an improvement needed in the hierarchy of Medra, you can always submit a change request to the MSSO, and they will be reviewed and assessed as to whether or not, yes, there is a good request here for making changes. So I hope that's clear. Hannah, any question on this before we move on?
I am not seeing any questions yet.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next item that we're going to be talking about in terms of principles are the organization-specific data characteristics. So, of course, Medra, we said Medra is a standard, but different organizations can implement Medra in different ways. So it's important to understand your own organization-specific data characteristics and implementation strategies. So, for example, in your database structure, how is the Medra hierarchy stored and how is it used? Do you show all levels of the hierarchy that we just showed you? Do you have the access to the high-level terms, high-level grouping terms, or not? When you store your data, what level of term do you store? Are you using synonyms or just the reported verbatims? Do you use synonym list when you're coding or not? Is there a global synonym list or not? When you're conducting data conversion from other terminologies or for legacy data, what is your approach? How do you document changes in coding practices over time? Are there any limitations where you're unable to view the secondary system organ class in the way that the data is set up and implemented in your organization? And what are your term selection principles? So, for example, does your organization have a just one-to-one correlation when you're coding, that there's only one Medra lowest level term or LLT assigned per verbatim, or do you allow more than one LLT when you're coding? And I think some folks on the line may find that a bit surprising because some people may work in a setting where it's always a one-to-one correlation, but no, there are organizations that allow for multiple LLT selections and have their own guidelines in terms of how to approach data analysis. So all of these are points to think about when you're approaching MedDRA use for data analysis, and if you're sharing it with partners, partner organizations, to also share with them snippets of these principles that you follow to clarify the output when you're sharing with them. Okay, so the next general principle are the impact of the grouping terms on MedDRA characteristics and MedDRA analysis. So we just said that MedDRA has those 5 levels, and we showed under cardiac disorders how the high-level grouping terms group types of cardiac disorders that are similar together. And then these HLGTs also have subgroupings within them that are even more specific. So, for example, if you're interested in supraventricular tachycardia for your particular product, rather than review all the offered preferred terms within the cardiac disorder system organ class, or even within the HLGT of cardiac arrhythmias, you may be interested in focusing your attention on the preferred terms that are grouped under the HLT of supraventricular tachycardia. So we're going to drive this point home in coming slides as well, but these grouping terms are really helpful when you're doing data analysis and data aggregation. All right, so here's other points about grouping terms. Some of the system organ classes group terms based on purpose. So we said we have a system organ class for investigations. So investigations are codable in MedDRA because you do want to capture what the actions taken for your patients were. So if they underwent any specific types of x-rays or lab workup or anything like that, you want to be able to code that. And you want to be able to code the results if they're abnormal. So within the same investigation system organ classes, you're going to see selections in there that convey results where they are abnormal, and the abnormality can be either increased or decreased. You're also going to see preferred terms that speak to results that are normal, and you're also going to see preferred terms that just speak to the investigation being done. And they're all being grouped under the investigation system organ class. So if you're looking inside the investigation system organ class to select information, that would not be a good option to select all the PTs under the same HLT, because you're going to be collecting all of these different types of scenarios, whether the blood pressure is increased as well as decreased, maybe even as well as normal and as well as without any qualifier. And that will not really be helpful for you in identifying the cases of interest. So under the investigation SOC, you do need to be very careful and intentional in your selection of PTs in those groupings. Another point to kind of convey as well is that sometimes related PTs are not necessarily in the same HLT and not necessarily in the same HLGT. So if you're interested in dermatological reactions to drugs like Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and you find it under bullous conditions, just bear in mind that there are other types of drug reactions you may find in different HLTs, like exfoliative conditions. So if you don't look around and find them, you may be underreporting or underestimating the incidence of safety events in your data. We already talked a little bit about multi-axiality, how the same term in MedDRA can be linked to more than one system organ class. And this is a really important point when you're thinking about data retrieval and data analysis, because if you omit looking in the secondary system organ classes, you're not going to be finding all the terms that are relevant to your area of interest or to your safety question. Of course, the impact on frequencies of medical conditions should be considered, right? So when you're linking the same term to more than one system organ class, it doesn't mean that you want to count it more than one time, but you want to be able to retrieve it from a different system organ class than the one that it's primarily linked to. And that's where the importance of secondary system organ classes comes in, and we're going to show examples on that in coming slides. Also, you want to be able to retrieve relevant terms in your search, regardless of which system organ class they exist in. So if you're interested in kidney issues based on the products that you're reviewing, you do want to start off with the renal system organ class, of course. That's a very good point to start. But don't forget there are other system organ classes that may have terms relevant to your search or to your area of interest outside of the kidney system organ class. And there are 3 system organ classes in MedDRA that are always uniaxial, meaning that the preferred terms in these system organ classes will always exist only in that system organ class. And when you think about it, under investigations, under surgeries or medical procedures, and under social circumstances, those are really good system organ classes to be uniaxial. And they are, in fact, the system organ classes that are uniaxial. So if you had a blood work done, that blood work could be related to multiple medical concepts or multiple medical conditions. The same for a medical procedure. So one single medical procedure can actually be related to multiple medical conditions or reasons for doing that procedure. So it becomes very challenging and problematic to create adequate links within MedDRA. So the easiest approach is to keep them uniaxial. Social circumstances are another good example. So if the patient has a specific diet or a specific disability, that can be a risk factor for multiple conditions. So again, it's uniaxial, but they're important to remember that if you're creating a query and looking for terms in MedDRA that talk to a specific area of concern, don't forget to look through these 3 uniaxial system organ classes, because those PTs are not linked elsewhere. Even if you run your analysis using the secondary system organ class, you won't be able to retrieve them. So just an important point there to remember to look through uniaxial system organ classes when you're conducting researches. Now, the standard de facto presentation of data across multiple organizations usually is by primary system organ class. And the benefit of that is that it shows you every event or every term only once, so that there's no confusion about the frequency of the terms reported. So that's the main presentation. But the secondary system organ classes really give you the full picture of your data. And we're going to show you examples of how that is impactful to you when you're running your data analysis. But let's start with something simple. Let's start with the grouping terms. Here's an example of an output comparing your particular product events to those of placebo. And you found that in the system organ class of investigations, you have a significant difference for the events reported under investigation SOC. And just looking at the list of the types of different preferred terms that outputted in your data, you're not sure if there's a significant cluster here or not. You're seeing a few aspartate aminotransferase increased, right? PTs, you're seeing a few of those. You're seeing other types of enzymes increase, but you're not sure if there's a clear cluster here. And just to show you, this is the full output of it. So one easy way to identify if there's a cluster, you already know there are grouping terms within MedDRA that collect similar terms together. So if you run your analysis and just same output, but just add one level, add the HLT level. So this is the same output, but all we did is we added the high-level term in the same output. And now you see a clear cluster here for liver function analysis. You know where you want to focus your attention. You may even want to take a look at your tissue enzyme analysis and possibly digestive and white blood, maybe not, but definitely you want to have a discussion with your medical reviewers about your liver function analysis. And that's all part of the MedDRA hierarchy. So the grouping has already been done for you. All you need to do is request to see it with that grouping term included in your output. All right, so another principle that we talk about is MedDRA versioning. So MedDRA is released twice per year. The March release is called the complex release, where there is potential for changes across all levels of MedDRA. But the September releases are called simple releases. They come out in September, and the changes are only limited to the LLT and the PT levels in MedDRA. When you're documenting your steps for data retrieval and presentation, one of the very important things is to document which MedDRA version you used. And of course, the MedDRA version used for query creation should be the MedDRA version in your coded data. So you want to compare the same version to each other. We do have resources that are made available to you every time we release a MedDRA version. We release that's once new document that's in that gray banner under the support documentation that we showed you. The What's New document is a very short document, but really very useful because it tells you the details of what changed between the two successive MedDRA versions. There's also a lot of discussion about your options for versioning under the MedDRA Best Practices document. That's under the blue banner. So they're available to you online. And every time we release MedDRA, we release a version report that gives the details of the changes between the current MedDRA version and the one that was just released. And there's a tool called the MVAT tool, the MedDRA version analysis tool. And hopefully, if we have time, we'll do a quick demo on that tool that helps you identify changes between two different versions of MedDRA, whether those versions are consecutive versions or not. So here's an example of how changes in MedDRA impacts your data analysis. Now, MedDRA is based, of course, on understanding of medical concepts and medical knowledge, and that is always continuing to evolve and grow. So MedDRA is a living, breathing database. And impacts to data retrieval can be a result of changes to the versions of MedDRA. So in MedDRA version 22.1, there was a separate preferred term for a fractured ischium and a separate preferred term for a pelvic fracture. That was in MedDRA version 22.1. One of the MedDRA users submitted a request and said, we don't understand why these are considered separate medical concepts because the ischium is part of the pelvis. So this was reviewed by the IMOs, and the IMOs agreed with the user and said, yes, you're right, we're going to be demoting the fractured ischium. So it's no longer a preferred term level. We're going to make it an LLT level, and it's going to be subsumed under pelvic fracture. But if you had legacy data in version 22.1, where you used the fractured ischium in your coding, and you had about 15 cases of fractured ischium, once you upversion your data to 23 and higher, you're no longer going to see those 15 cases of fractured ischium, and you're going to see a lot more cases of pelvic fracture. That doesn't mean that you had more cases of pelvic fracture in your updated data outputs. It just means that now they are all subsumed together and showing up in the one PT. And this is why it's important to understand the impact of MedDRA versioning on your data. Here's another example of impact of MedDRA versioning. So again in 22.1, the preferred term of vascular cognitive impairment was linked to the primary system organ class of psychiatric disorders. And another MedDRA user submitted a request and said, we don't agree with this link to the primary system organ class. We believe this is a nervous system disorder. And this was again reviewed by the IMOs, and that change request was approved. So now the primary system organ class was the nervous system disorder, and it had a secondary link to psychiatric. But if your data under 22.1 was upversioned, those 20 cases that you had under that system organ class of psychiatric disorders now disappeared. But they didn't really disappear. Now they just moved and are listed under the nervous system disorder. So the version report and the What's New document will help you anticipate these changes and explain why there has been a change in the way the data outputs are now conveying which system organ class is impacted. The MVAT tool helps you retrieve the changes or the impacted changes between two different Medra versions. Like we said, it is available online as part of your subscription, so there's no additional fee for using it. And it gives you really three different types of information or functionalities. So there's the version report, which is exportable. You can compare any two Medra versions. So if your data exists, for example, in Medra 23, and rather than compare it to 23.1, you want to compare it to Medra 27, you can do that. You can compare the two different versions and see what changed between those two versions. You can input your own data that was coded to Medra in your version 23 and compare it to version 27 and see how the change impacts it. Or you can put in a specific term and identify the historical changes to that unique specific Medra term. The MVAT can be used with different languages as an interface language. It also can produce reports in all the supported Medra languages, and you can run it against supplemental. Supplemental data in Medra basically means that the user requests that have been received and approved so far are available to you to see as a supplemental change. It's going to be coming in the next Medra version, but it hasn't been officially released yet. But it will help you assess or anticipate a future impact to your data because it is available to you. Another nice feature in the MVAT is that it allows you to run reports on your secondary system organ class changes. We do have a very nice webinar that walks you through this. So I'm going to show you first what the webinar is and then do a quick demo. So this is our website again, medra.org, and under training, there's an option for training materials. If you expand the one under tools, and you go down, you're going to see that there's a demo for MVAT in English Part 1 and Part 2. So it walks you through how to use the Medra version analysis tool. You can pause it as you click along and test it out, but I'm going to give you a very quick demo right now. So let's go back to our home page, and under how to use, there's an option for tools. And there's the link for the MVAT. And you're able to also access MVAT with the temporary credentials that we provided to you. So you can go in and tag along if you like, if you want to click along. So it will default open to the following. It will default open to the English language, but you can change that if you have different language data that you're interested in. And of course, the interface language can also be changed if you like. And it defaults to the current release, which is 28, and the one right before it. But you can change to any different version of Medra that you're interested in. Of course, as long as your starting version is older than your ending version, and you can opt to see any secondary SOC information, or you can keep it defaulted unticked. And if you're working with products that are specific to certain system organ classes, you can even limit it. Like, let's say all your work is in eyes disorders. All your impact of your products is in eye disorder. So you're just interested in that one. You're not interested in any changes that happened in any other system organ class. You can limit it, or you can choose more than one, or you can just go over it, the whole thing, the whole Medra. So I'm going to leave it as defaulted and just run the version report and see the output. When the tool is finished, and usually it doesn't take too long, but because I'm sharing the screen, it might take a few seconds. When the tool is finished, it will give you the summary of the output right on your screen. So there's numbers here. So between Medra 27.1 and Medra 28, you can see, for example, there's 291 new preferred terms that were added. And if I click on detail on the same screen, I can see exactly what these terms that were added are. So I can see which primary system organ class they were assigned. I can also see how many LLTs, and of course, because we said every PT is an LLT, so these 291 are also included in the 789 of all the new LLTs that were added in Medra. One thing that's really important is currency changes. Currency changes are really important because if a term has become non-current in Medra, that means you can no longer use it for coding. So if you have already used this term for coding, then you want to recode your data because it's no longer a current term. So non-currency is a very important part of the MVAT output and really helpful for you to identify. All right, so what if I want to look at this in an Excel and share it with someone? Yes, you can export everything to a spreadsheet. You can also select and choose which one of these outputs you're interested in exporting, but let's keep it all defaulted and just export to a spreadsheet. So it right away goes to my downloads and it shows you the summary on the first page. There's these nice red deltas that kind of talk you through exactly what the details of the report output is, and then each output is on its own tab. So you can share this, you can save it, you can use it for potential impact on your own data. But another nice thing about the tool is that I can do a data impact report. Basically, I can input my own data into the MVAT, as long as it's coded data, of course, coded to Medra, and I can assess whether or not there's going to be impact to that data, to next version. So let's say that I have data that exists in Medra 27, and I want to upversion to Medra 28. But I want to see what's going to be the impact. Do I need to change a lot of terms or not? So again, the data has to be already coded in Medra, and the tool will never save your data. So even if you input data into the MVAT tool, it never saves the data. Under the import data, it tells you exactly how the data should look like to be able to be inputted into Medra, but it's really very simple. Basically, it asks you for 3 columns. The first column is optional. You can put in your row ID if you have any case identifiers. If you don't want to use them, that's fine. Just keep the column blank as long as the column exists, because the tool will start looking at the Medra data starting from column B, and it will look at it as either an LLT or a PT. So you can input your data at either level, that's fine. And the third level is for code. Now, if your data is English, then either one of them is fine. You don't have to put both. But if your data is in a language other than English, then please use the code or use both, because you have to be very specific. Sometimes in the translations you have duplications of translations in other languages other than English. So you want to make sure that you are conveying the correct term. And I choose my file. So for these purposes, we already have an MVAT demo. I'm going to select that report, and I'm going to run it. So basically what the tool is doing is checking the data inside or in my tracker against the upversion. It's going to tell me if it found any impact to my data. And like we said, it doesn't save your data, but if you don't export this report once it's ready for you and you forget and you exit the tool, you'll have to rerun it again. So looking at the summary on the bottom, you see a lot of numbers and you worry that, oh my God, there's so many changes to my data. But no. This column, this only tells you in general between the version 27 and 28, here's a summary of the changes. Of course, there's no new LLTs or no new PTs because these are data already coded. But it'll show you here are promotions from LLT to PT, here are demotions, here's the currency changes. In my own data between 27 and 28, there's very minor impact. So basically one LLT here, and if I click on it, moved from one preferred term in 27 to a different preferred term in 28. And there's a few comprehensive LLTs. Comprehensive LLTs are not necessarily impactful to my data. Basically, comprehensive LLTs say that these are siblings of LLTs that you have in your data. They're not really data. that you have in your report, but there are siblings of data in your report. In case you're interested, these have changed. So even if that number is a bit higher, it doesn't mean that I have to go in and make any recoding to these terms because they're not really on my data. They're just sibling data. And I can, of course, export this data. I can save it and it'll show up in my downloads, the same as with the version report itself. The third functionality of the tool is a search term change. So I can put in a single term and I can look up the historical changes of that single term. I can either put the full term or I can use the wildcard if I put in the roots of the words. And it will tell me, for example, I found nasal sinus drainage for these roots. I found endoscopic nasobiliary drainage. Which one would you like to see? And if I click on the nasal sinus drainage, it will show me the details of that term from the time it was first entered into Medra in version 4 to the current placement. As of version 9, there has been no further changes to this term. So if you receive any questions or if you are interested in a particular term, you can certainly use the tool to look up that term. All right, so we did the MBAT demo. So Hannah, any questions at this time?
I am not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about the use of Medra in data retrieval, presentation, and analysis. Starting with, we said that the simplest way to start looking at your data is by an overview of the primary system organ class. Well, one of the things to bear in mind is that Medra has different languages. So if we want to sort these system organ classes alphabetically, it's really not a standard approach because we have so many different languages, I think over 20, 22 by now, if not higher. So there is an internationally agreed order of system organ classes that you can use and share with your colleagues or with your sister organizations or with your partners. And some guidelines do specify the use of this international order of system organ classes, like the summary of product characteristics in EU. This order, international order of system organ classes, is provided to you in our Medra introductory guide, as well as the ASCII files that we provide to you with every version release. We already showed you examples of why the grouping terms in Medra will be helpful to you when you're analyzing your data. So in that investigation output, just adding the HLT level in Medra helped you find the cluster, helped you identify the area of concern. So right away, just looking at your data by system organ class and by grouping terms is an easy way to identify clusters or areas of concern. Of course, some folks have line listings, some folks use tables, some folks use graphs. They're all helpful, and especially when you start thinking about larger data sets, that's when the graphs are really visually helpful. So primary system organ class is a good starting point. It's a broad overview. It shows the preferred terms displayed only once, and it's really helpful when you have a short set of data. But like we said, sometimes relevant data to your search are not linked to that primary system organ class. It's linked to a secondary system organ class. So when you're just looking at the primary system organ class, you're not getting the full picture that's available to you. There's something hidden in there that you're not yet revealing. And if you're looking by primary system organ class as a listing and you have a large data set, sometimes it becomes very lengthy and hard to interpret. So here's an example of where a graph is helpful. This is a large output, but when I convey it to a graph, even if I'm not familiar with all the details of the product, I can right away tell that there's an issue here under, for example, the psychiatric SOC. I can see that there's a lot of a good number of preferred terms clustered under the psychiatric disorders. Maybe I want to take a closer look at that system organ class in more detail. So I know where I want to start targeting my review just by looking at the graph in primary system organ class. Once I identify, like let's say I identified that I'm interested in the nervous system disorders, I have a starting point cluster here. I can choose to specify that output to be in HLTs and HLGTs to help me even zone in more closely on the area of concern here. So I'm starting off with this small output, and I noticed that I already have a small cluster in my nervous system disorders of 8 events in the nervous system SOC. If I look at these 8 events using the grouping terms of HLTs and HLGTs, I can tell that the majority of them, about 5, are in the same HLGT of movement disorder. So I can start paying closer attention to movement disorders. Why are they the most in my nervous system disorder? Is there something going on here? So that's a very nice starting point for the data analysis and the data assessment. Once I know what I need to focus on, I can start thinking of secondary system organ class assignments or a secondary system organ class look. For secondary looks, it really depends on whether or not your organization allows you access to that level of hierarchy in MedDRA. Is it available to you or is it not available to you? So that's one of the questions we said. You need to be familiar with the characteristics of data use and implementation of MedDRA that are specific to your organization. But we do have tools that will help you identify the secondary system organ class, even if your organization does not support that. Now, of course, the benefit is that you are seeing a wider, clearer picture of your data. But bear in mind that when you're looking at secondary system organ class assignments, that one term, that congenital tachycardia or congenital supraventricular arrhythmia, is going to show up twice. It's going to show up once under cardiac and the second time under congenital. So it's going to skew your view of the frequency, but it's going to improve your view of the safety or the aggregation or the cluster. And of course, we already talked about the HLTs, HLGTs, but of course, SMQs are a good area to focus your search. And SMQs and customized searches will be a topic we touch in more detail on the 22nd of May. So you're welcome to join us for that. So here's a good example to show you the benefit of secondary system organ class review and assignments. As always happens, sometimes you get an urgent request from someone and you just had an output of the data. So this is another mock data output that says, I have these about 20 or so preferred terms on this slide and the next slide that came out from this particular product review. And I'm seeing some terms with autoimmune in them. So you get a call from your safety physician saying, how many autoimmune terms do we have in our database so far? Is this going to be an issue or not? Well, just because the term has autoimmune does not mean that they're going to be linked primarily to the immune system disorders. So you see here, autoimmune neutropenia is primarily under blood. Autoimmune myocarditis is primarily under cardiac disorders. And there may be terms in here that we're not very familiar with. So if you see Evans syndrome, you're not really sure, is this an autoimmune disease or if it's not an autoimmune disease? Looking at more outputs. So here's under the endocrine is the polyglandular autoimmune, looks like it's an autoimmune, but what about Burchard chorioretinopathy under eye disorders? Is this an autoimmune disease or not? And even more examples. So musculoskeletal, are any of those potentially autoimmune diseases? So, okay, so you have an urgent request and you're not sure exactly how to start. Of course, one option is you consult a colleague who is a medical reviewer or a safety physician, and they may be able to help you if the database or the number of terms you're looking at is limited or small. You can do online searches. You can select a valid medical reference and look them up and make a decision that way. But I want to show you a way where you can get this information within MedDRA, because we said MedDRA aggregates terms that are medically related. It already aggregates them together. So is it possible that MedDRA already aggregates terms that are autoimmune related autoimmune conditions. So let's take a look. And I want to give you just a quick overview of the different browsers you can use for this. So Medra has multiple different browsers. We have the web-based browser. We already showed you the one we have. We do have a new web-based browser that we were very excited about. It came out December of last year. The slides do have the links to both of them. Your credentials, temporary credentials, as well as your organization credentials will give you access to all the browsers. So feel welcome to experiment and try them all. The desktop browser is a browser that you can download to your desktop and use offline. So you can use it even without internet. But the desktop browser, you will need to upload the Medra files in it. I mean, it comes with the full functionality of the Medra browser, but we don't have access to it. So we can't upload the Medra files into it. So once you upload or download the Medra desktop browser to your computer, just remember that you do need to upload all the Medra files in whatever languages you're interested in. The mobile browser is a URL. It's not an app, but it's designed to be useful or easy to navigate on your smartphone screen. Both the desktop and the web-based browser are helpful when you're doing inputting data, but all the browsers work with, like we said, the same ID and password. They all allow you to search Medra and search the SMQs. They all support all the released Medra languages. You can change your interface to whichever language you prefer. And for the desktop and the web-based, you're able to export search results. So if you're doing export analysis and inputting data, you want to avoid the mobile browser for that. And of course, the browsers will show you both the primary and secondary link information. You can upload your own data and use the SMQ tools in the web-based browser and the desktop browser, and that's another topic for the SMQ webinar. And of course, you can use advanced Boolean search options if you want to specify a bit more detail in your search options. That's a topic we cover in the Medra coding webinars. For the supplemental changes, we said supplemental are changes that have not yet been released in Medra, but as the IMO team at the MSSO approves changes to Medra, new terms in Medra, they become available to you as supplemental. Of course, they're only available in the web-based browser. You will need the web-based browser for that because we can't keep updating the downloaded desktop browsers. We can't access those desktop browsers. So for supplemental, it's only available on the web-based browser. Okay, so this was the question, right, that we were trying to answer. We have the set of 20-some preferred terms, and the question is how many of them are autoimmune disorders. So let's see if we can start figuring out the response. And let me take you to the web-based browser. Okay, so we're gonna just restore defaults, and let's start with an easy one. So if we go to autoimmune neutropenia, so that was one of the terms that I had on my list. Okay, so autoimmune neutropenia. And I just want to show you something. So when I look up autoimmune neutropenia, I see it in my search result box with a plus sign next to it. I'm now at the lowest level term. I'm now at the LLT level in Medra. And if I expand the plus signs or the hierarchy, I'm going to see the two system organ classes that this term is linked to in Medra. Is linked primarily to the blood disorders. It has a secondary link to the immune disorders. Under the immune disorders, I see an HLGT of autoimmune disorders. So I already see that this is linked to an autoimmune disorders. If I right-click that and I go to browser, it takes me straight to that HLGT in my browser, and I see all the subgroupings. There could be autoimmune disorders that are from the blood grouping, endocrine grouping, hepatic, lupus, muscular, etc. So all of these. But since I have these autoimmune disorders, I wonder what other terms in my list of 20-some PTs have the same link to this HLGT? So let's start let's see one of the ones that we're not very familiar with, Evans syndrome. Let's try Evans syndrome. If I click on Evans syndrome, the details will show up in my right-hand side. So let me just click on Evans syndrome. Rather than expanding the pluses every time, I can just click on it. And I see the same link. So I see the link from Evans syndrome to the autoimmune disorders. This is really very good. That means Evans syndrome, even though the primary link is blood, it is truly an autoimmune disorder. It has a secondary link to it. So I can include that as part of the terms that are autoimmune disorders. But do I really have to continue one by one? And is there an easier way for me to do it? Now, there are multiple ways for you to do it. You can do it one by one. You can right click on each one and just add it. You see the option to add to research bin. So basically what I did was, once I looked up the term, I right clicked on it. And when I right clicked on it, I had the option to add it to my research bin. So I can put multiple options. I can do that. What was it? It was the birdshot, right? So that was a birdshot. I can also right click and add that to my research bin. I can add, I think vitiligo was one of them. I can add that to my research bin. But again, it's one by one. And why am I adding these to my research bin? Because my research bin will give me the chance to export all of these terms that I'm looking up and show the secondary system organ class. And if I export them into an Excel sheet, I can see which of the terms has a secondary link to the autoimmune disorders. So I can see that Evans syndrome is linked to autoimmune disorders. The birdshot chorioretinopathy is linked. Even the vitiligo is also linked. So yes, I can see these three terms are autoimmune disorders, but I'm still doing it one by one. So there's an easier way to do it. We have tools in the Medra browsers that are part of the browser called the hierarchy analysis. And I really like this tool. When you click on the hierarchy analysis, similar to the MVAT, it will tell you, do you want to import data? Just please be careful with the version. The version defaults to the most recent version, just like the MVAT does. So if you're inputting data, just please make sure that the data you're inputting, you know the version, and select the appropriate version. Otherwise, you won't be really comparing accurately, and you may miss out on information. So if I want to import data, the same setup as the MVAT. It's just going to ask me for 3 columns. Do you have a row identifier? And please put in the LLTs and or the codes depending on if you're in English or not. So of course, if your Excel sheet has columns even more than that, it doesn't really matter. The tool is going to look at the 3 columns. So you don't really have to delete and modify and everything, as long as you're ordering the columns in this particular order, so the tool can be looking at the right information in the right spot. So I'm going to choose my file, and this time I'm going to choose the one for secondary analysis, and I'm going to hit next. So it's really very quick. It already gave me the output. So here's my output. Now remember, I only had 20-some preferred terms, but I see 40-some rows. And the reason for that is because I told the tool, I said, I want to see the secondary system organ classes. This is the whole point of this exercise. So I'm seeing the same PTs, right? I'm seeing the same PTs more than once. So it doesn't mean I have more events now. It's just that I'm seeing them more than once. And we talked about that. We said it's going to skew your frequency, but it's going to give you a clearer safety picture. So let me just data filter, and let me look for my autoimmune, right? I've said I'm interested in the HLGT for autoimmune disorders. And just by filtering for the HLGTs, I can now see all of the PTs that I had on my list. Here's my terms that I entered in my tool. Here's my row IDs that were in there. So here are my preferred terms. So 11 of my 20 preferred terms, or 20-some preferred terms, 11 of them are autoimmune disorders, even though out of them only one has a link to the primary system organ class of immune system disorders. So even though only one term has a primary link to the immune system disorders, all 11 are autoimmune disorders. And I did it very quickly. I just inputted the data and I filtered. That was all I did. Well, if I'm interested in the specific number of cases, I can do it one step further. Let me go back to the tool. Here's the tool again, right? I said I want to import the data, but now I'm going to import a bit of a different tracker. I'm going to show you the tracker that I'm going to be inputting. This is my tracker now. So for this next demonstration, I'm going to show you a little bit of a tweak to the first one. Is I'm adding actually the subject identifiers, because I want to know exactly which subjects have autoimmune disorders, not just which PTs. I want to know the exact subjects. I'm going to send that list to my safety reviewer so that they can take a look at those cases more closely. So I added my subject identifier, and of course I'm keeping the coding term and the MedDRA, the code. This can be in LLT, this can be in PT, it doesn't really matter. The tool will work either way. And if you're not sure which level you have, it doesn't really matter. You can just input it to the tool and the tool will figure it out for you. But because I have my subject IDs, I'm no longer just looking at 20 rows. I'm looking at closer to 50, because now this is my full data set. As of now, this is what I have as a full data set. Okay, let me close the report because the tool won't be able to retrieve the data if my Excel sheet is open. So I'm just going to close it. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to my tool. Here's my hierarchy tool. I'm going to tell my tool, okay, let's run this report again, but I want to run it with the subject identifiers. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to open up the export, enable the editing just so I can filter, and I'm going to choose to filter by autoimmune disorders. And now I'm going to take a look. And I have the exact number of subjects. I have 30. I can see it on the bottom here. I have 30 subjects from my data set who have autoimmune disorders. And I can send this tracker off to whoever requested the information with these details. So I hope that this was useful. Hannah, any questions at this point?
I am not seeing any questions.
All right. I hope that's because it's clear and not because of people not being able to pose questions. Okay, so so this is the benefit, really the huge benefit of using secondary system organ class information. It gives you a clear idea of the clusters in your data. And of course, you can access that information in multiple ways. Now, we said that the new web-based browser is available. It has the same features. So just like we exported our search results in the current web-based browser, the new one allows you to do the same. So this is a screenshot of the new web-based browser compared to the existing web-based browser. It has the same functionality. It also allows you to use the research bin. So the same functionality, just like we saw in the current web-based browser. Here's a screenshot from the new web-based browser. And here's one from the current. So the same functionality of using the research bin, and of course, running the hierarchy analysis feature. So the new web-based browser has the same feature as the existing web-based browser in terms of the hierarchy analysis. It's even better because the new web-based browser allows you to input more than 100,000 rows, while the existing web-based browser limits you to 100,000 at a time. And when you export your output, it's the same thing. You're going to see the same thing, whether you use the new web-based browser or whether you use the existing web-based browser. And this is how we reached the final answer, is that out of my set of 50-some cases, 30 subjects have autoimmune disorders in my data set. And I just want to show you where to access the new web-based browser. So this is our homepage under how to use, again, tools. And here's a link for our browsers. So you're going to see the link for the web-based browser, the same one that's the same quick link as the one on the top of the website, but also under it is the new web-based browser. And just to show you what it looks like, you can use the same credentials to access. I'm going to restore default settings to kind of show you what you will see when you first go in. The same output of the 27 system organ classes on your left, the search text on your right. Is more of a simplified interface. So it really just has all the functionalities, but it's just a simplified interface. And under the tools icon, you're going to see the MVAT built in to the new web-based browser. Now remember, they're separate currently, but it's built into the new web-based browser, which is very exciting. And here's your hierarchy analysis tool built into the new web-based browser. And under the import data, there's no restriction anymore for 100,000 rows. So that's a big improvement. All right, let's go to our next section. So we're going to talk about how to develop queries using Medra. A couple of polls now as we start. Do you have any experience in query building using Medra? So if you can just log in and to the poll and provide your answer for that one. Okay, so looks like very few people or none at all have experience. Okay, so maybe some folks with a little experience. All right, so what about when you're doing data reporting and analysis? Which Medra level do you typically perform this functionality for data reporting and analysis? Now, we said for data coding, when you're coding in Medra, you want to use the lowest level term because that's the most granular. So you have the most options, but many of them are siblings, and that's why there's so many of them, about 90,000. But when you're doing your data reporting, sometimes there are guidelines that dictate to you which level of Medra to use. And what about data analysis? So let's see responses. We don't have a very interactive audience today, not a lot of folks on the tool, so I hope that it's not because you're having difficulty accessing the tool, but okay, let's see what the responses we have. Okay, this is really nice. So data reporting and data analysis is typically performed at the PT level. Many folks also include the system organ class when they're doing the data reporting and the data analysis. The other grouping terms, the HLT, the HLGT, are optional but very helpful in your data reporting and analysis. All right, and then when you're building a query, which level of Medra is typically performed? Okay, and some responses coming in. And just to show you examples while the responses come in, I want to show you an example of, or maybe after we answer this one. Let's answer this question first, and then I'll show you the examples of how some guidelines dictate the level of Medra you use in your reporting. Okay, so let's show the answers here. All right, so this seems to be a little bit widespread in terms of the response. When you're query building, which level of Medra do you typically use? Let's put a pin in that and address it in the next slides, but I just want to show you. I just want to show you a on the ICH website. So this is back to our medra.org. This is the ICH website, and we said how Medra is an ICH guideline and that it's part of the ICH standards. Many of the guidelines are familiar to you, I'm sure. So folks from pharmacovigilance will be familiar with the E2 guidelines. And if you look up some of these E2 guidelines, like the periodic benefit risk evaluation report, if you look up this report and you look up, for example, the word Medra, you're going to see a guidance within that standard talking about which level of MEDRA to be presented, the PT level and the SOC level in the summary tabulations. So this is very interesting that if you're complying with any of these ICH standards, take a look, see if MEDRA is mentioned to specify the level that it should be included in your presentation. So for example, here it says for the DSURs is that you have to have the preferred term. Especially when you're coding adverse events or reaction terms, you have to have the preferred term in your line listings and summary tabulations. I thought that was a little bit of interesting bit of information. Okay, query building in MEDRA. So basically what a query building is, you have a set of data in your database, whether it's a clinical database, safety database, or other. And your data is coded typically at the LLT level, because that's the level that you code data in. So you have all these LLTs in your database, but you're interested to know how many of your events or how many of your collected data fields represent a specific point of interest, a specific area of safety. You have a safety question that you want answered, just like we did with the autoimmune disorder. That was a safety question. So how would we be able to get the response? What we need to do is we need to collect MEDRA terms that represent that safety question or that area of interest, and then look through our database to see if we have any that match them. When we build a query, and that's the response to the poll, typically we build the query at the preferred term level. Why? Because the preferred term standardizes all your coded data that are similar to each other. Just like we said, abdominal pain, abdominal colic, or an upset tummy or a tummy ache, they are all possible LLTs, but they represent the same medical concept of abdominal pain. So if you build your query and say, I'm looking for abdominal pain, the query itself is going to look for all the LLTs that fall under that preferred term. It's going to look for anything that says abdominal pain. It's going to find tummy ache. It's going to find colic, and it's going to retrieve it for you, even though you didn't specify them. So it's easier and it's more accurate to build your query at the preferred term level. There are certain areas where the LLT is of interest, like if you think about infections, for example, the specific species may be detailed at the LLT level. So that's something to think about when you're building query for that purpose. But in general, the PT is the level that serves you best when you're building your query. And when you're building your query, you always start with defining your condition. So if I'm looking for autoimmune disorder, I need to define that. I need to develop my inclusion and exclusion criteria. And that's where I need input from different stakeholders in my team. I need folks who understand medically what these safety questions are looking for, but I also need folks who understand MEDRA, because folks who understand MEDRA will be able to tell me whether these groups already exist at the maybe system organ class level, at the HLGT level, at the HLT level, and whether I need to look in all the different system organ classes or maybe other system organ classes. So for example, if I'm looking for arrhythmia, if I'm looking for the safety question of arrhythmia, maybe some of the signs and symptoms are manifestations outside the cardiac system organ class. Maybe somebody comes in with a shortness of breath. Well, that's a respiratory manifestation, but it could be of interest to me. And when we right-click on a term in MEDRA and go to the browser, we see the neighboring terms for that term in MEDRA. So if I was interested in that Burchard retinopathy, and I like that, maybe it has surrounding terms that are similar that I want to group along with it in my query. I can right-click that term and look for the neighbors. And like we said, the LLTs are a bit too granular for purposes of MEDRA building, with very minor exceptions, like if you're looking for species in your infections. Okay, one of the really important things to do is that once you're done all this work to build a query, it's very important that you store it, you document it. This will help you answer questions from team members if you get them. This will help you answer questions from regulators once you submit. This will help you maintain that list if the folks who built it changed the team and moved on to different teams. And it will help you when you review your list as new Medra versions are released, because we said medicine continues to grow and we continue to learn things and we continue to build Medra and improve Medra based on user requests. So new Medra versions may impact the query that you built. So every time there's a new Medra release version, maybe it's a good idea for you to take a look at the new PTs that came out, or how did the PTs change? Did any get downgraded to LLT levels? And if so, why? And did that impact any of the PTs you chose when you built your query? A really nice place always to start is, do we already have a group in Medra? So we said for cardiac arrhythmias, we showed it on the browser. We started with the HLGT of cardiac arrhythmia. Well, if I'm not sure how to do that, then how do I find a group? So let's go back to our browser. So we said, let's restore defaults and let's go with cardiac arrhythmia. So if I'm not sure if there's a grouping term, notice that when I put in any term in my search box, it defaults to different levels of Medra that it's looking in. It's already looking for that term, not only at the LLT level, which is the one that's defaulted for me to view, but it's also looking for it at the PT level, HLT, HLGT, and SOC. So if I'm interested in cardiac arrhythmia, I can simply put in cardiac arrhythmia and then look for a matching HLGT. So I see it already. And if I right click it and I go to browser, it takes me straight to where that HLGT exists in my Medra browser. And I can expand that and look at the subgroupings within it. Now, if I'm building a query specifically looking for supraventricular arrhythmia, I don't need all of the others. But if I'm just looking for any type of cardiac arrhythmia, then maybe I do want all of them. And I can always expand each one and talk it over with one of my team members. Well, it may be a bit challenging to, expand and talk it over on a screen. Maybe Excel is easier. Can I export this into an Excel? And the answer is yes. Again, with the right click, if I want to right click it, this time, because this is an HLGT, I don't want to add it directly to my research bin. If I just click add to my research bin, it's just going to add that HLGT. And since I know I already used my research bin, let me just take a look. Is my research bin already in use? Yes, I have information in it. So let me, before I make any changes or any uses to my research bin, let me clear my research bin. I want to start a new look. So if I just right click and add that HLGT, it's going to add it as an HLGT. That's not really what I want. So I'm going to clear and I'm going to choose instead to add selected levels to my research bin. So it's going to ask me, are you okay with defaulting to all levels? So if I have LLTs, PTs, HLTs, and HLGTs, you want them all? Well, not really. I just want my PTs because I'm building a query. Unless, of course, I'm interested in the specific LLTs to discuss with maybe my medical reviewer. But I'm really interested in my PTs. So I'm just going to choose my PTs and I'm going to click next. And right away, instead of copying them over one by one to ask my medical reviewer which one of these they like, I can just export them to an Excel sheet and send this over to them. But this is not the only area in Medra that is relevant to cardiac arrhythmias. So we said that when you're looking at terms in Medra, you may want to think about other system organ classes that are relevant to your area of interest or your safety question that may be outside of the primary system organ class that comes straight to mind. So arrhythmias, you straight away think cardiac disorders. But like we said, arrhythmias could have manifestations outside of the cardiac disorder. Maybe that patient presented with syncope, with shortness of breath. So if I put in short breath, if I put in short breath, I'm going to find breath shortness and shortness of breath. They all go to dyspnea. So maybe this is a good one for me to add to my research bin. So there we go. I added dyspnea to my research bin. I can also right click and go to dyspnea in my browser and see, well, if this was relevant, are there any siblings? So I see dyspnea because it has two links. I see it both under the cardiac and I see it under respiratory. I know I already pulled in this HLGT, so I did not put in the cardiac disorders, right? Signs and symptoms. So maybe I want to see it here. So maybe this is a good one. So under dyspneas and dyspnea at rest, dyspnea exertional. So maybe I like these as well. Do I want all of them? If I want all of them, again, I can just go to the HLT and add selected levels to the research bin for the PTs, or I can choose them one by one if I want. And sometimes it does that. So I'm sorry about the server error. Sometimes when I overload it with too many things and I'm sharing too many things, it does that. So we can just restart it. But let me just reset it. And let me see if I can open my research bin and just go back to my cardiac disorders with my HLGTs for cardiac arrhythmias. I'm going to add these at the PT level to my research bin. And I'm going to say, I'm going to add my dyspnea at the PT level to my research bin. Now, we said in the beginning, there are system organ classes that are uniaxial. We cannot forget to look in these for relevant terms. And the uniaxial system organ classes, we start with investigations. And there's my cardiac investigations. So if there's, for example, if I'm interested in ECG investigations and I say, maybe I'm interested in a couple of these. So let's do ECG abnormal. I'm going to add this to my research bin. And I'm going to say a pacemaker spike. I'm going to add this to my research bin. I'm also going to look in other uniaxial system organ classes. I'm going to look in the surgeries. There's my cardiac. And I'm going to find, for example, that they had an implantable defibrillator. I'm going to add this one to my research bin. And then I'm going to look in my social circumstances. That's another uniaxial, maybe under my lifestyle issues for any disabilities. And there's a artificial heart device. Okay, so heart device user. I'm going to add this to my research bin. And one thing that I always encourage to look in is the general, because the general conditions basically are conditions that are really hard to place someplace else. And one important thing to remember is that fatal outcomes always fall under general, because they could be related to so many different etiologies. So if I am interested in arrhythmia, sometimes the presenting symptom or the presenting manifestation of arrhythmia is sudden death or cardiac death. So let's say I want sudden cardiac death to add to my research bin. Well, I can keep going on and on, but just for time purposes, here's my research bin. If I export it, I'm able to see it with a lot more detail. I'm able to see the HLT, I'm able to see the HLGT, I'm able to see whether or not it's a primary or secondary link. So I can save this and I can share it with my medical review team. I can share it with anybody else on the team and make a decision when I'm building the query, which of these terms are relevant. So let's go back to the slides. So I did a top-down search from the grouping terms. I can also do a bottom-up search when I looked for shortness of breath. I looked at my uniaxial system organ classes. sorry. So I looked at my investigations. And remember, with investigations, you don't want the whole group because investigations can give you abnormal, normal, elevated, decreased. So you want to be intentional and specific in your investigations. You don't want to grab the whole group. And of course, the surgical and medical procedures are another uniaxial area that's important to look for because sometimes that is an indication of the safety area under review. So if they had a cardioversion or if they had an implantable defibrillator insertion, that's a good indication that there was some kind of arrhythmic pathology going on. And we talked about signs and symptoms. So that's where your medical input team plays a crucial part. They will help you identify the inclusion-exclusion criteria, including signs and symptoms that may not necessarily fall under your cardiac system organ class. So dyspneas is not in there. Disturbance in consciousness, if they lost consciousness, that's neurological. So something else to think about. And of course, we said general system organ class is a good area to look at because it captures the fatal outcomes, and those could be the presenting sign or symptom of arrhythmia. So here's an example of an output that shows different types of terms collected together for the purpose of cardiac arrhythmia and where the cases were found to be of interest, but where the system organ class was not cardiac. So you're going to see sudden death under general system organ class. You're going to see dyspnea under respiratory, syncope under nervous system disorders, and there's surgical for cardioversion, the cardiac assistance device user under social circumstances. So it's really important to bear in mind not to limit yourself to the primary system organ class when you're identifying your inclusion-exclusion terms. Okay, so now we're going to build a query together in the last 10 minutes and do the topic for cardiac failure. So, okay, let's start the same way we did before. We're going to start with just putting heart failure. And Medra has built-in synonyms, so even if I put heart failure, it's going to find anything that says cardiac and vice versa. So right away, I can see that there are HLGTs that are found. So I have heart failure, but remember, I have to show my research bin and clear everything in my research bin. Okay. So let me go to this, go to browser and take a look at the subgroupings. So heart failures, I have subgroupings for signs and symptoms, for not elsewhere classified, specific to left ventricle, specific to right ventricle. So maybe I want all of them. So I'm going to right click and add the selected levels. I'm going to add them at the PT level. And I can actually name it. I can say heart failure. So I can name my research bin. When I export it, it will say heart failure. I said, okay, let's look at the general. I'm going to also capture the death, even though it's not necessarily as relevant as arrhythmia, but just for the sake of the research here, I'm going to add it to my research bin. I'm going to look at investigations. So under cardiac investigations, maybe this time I'm looking for a little bit different. Maybe I'm looking for cardiac function, and maybe I'm looking for ejection fraction decrease. Maybe that's a better one for my purposes. So I'm going to add that to my research bin. What else? Let's look for, we said, social circumstances. So I'm going to go to disability issues, and I'm going to look for heart device. I like that one anyway, so I'm going to keep it. And I'm going to go to the surgeries, and I'm going to look for cardiac procedures, and I'm going to look for example, heart transplant. I like this one. I'm going to add that to my research bin. Okay, let's say I'm happy with a starting point. This is my research bin. I'm going to export my research bin. Here are my preferred terms. Now I'm seeing them all with sometimes duplicates because, like I said, I picked to see the primary as well as the secondary. I don't have to do the secondary if I don't want to. I can just simply untick it. Or I'd rather keep the HLTs, HLGTs, just because if they gave me a nice one, I may go back into that group term and see the other preferred terms in it. So let me export it now without my secondary system organ class. It's going to be a shorter output. Okay, so I see the preferred terms are not duplicated now because I didn't pick my secondary one. And I want to show you an example of something we created. Now, so far, the tools that we showed you did not require programming. You just use them as is. All you need is your own data. You don't need any programmer to assist you to use the tools. But you can create something that is programmable, of course. But I want to show you something. So these are examples of cardiac failure terms that we can include in our list if we want to. Hopefully we captured most of them. But if I want to create something that is programmable, so here's an example output. Here are example cases where these are all PTs per case, and they were reviewed by the medical monitor on the team to identify whether a case is likely or unlikely for heart failure. So the medical monitor had to review all of these events per case. And for example, the first one is just nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, so it's unlikely for heart failure. But this one is likely for heart failure because they had cardiac failure reported specifically. So yes, it's a potential case. This one is likely because they had dyspnea, paroxysmal nocturnal reported. So the medical monitor goes through them one by one, and they decide whether or not they are cases that need to be retrieved for review for my area of interest, which is heart failure. But if I go into my exported research bin, I just did all that work. I collected all those PTs from that HLGT and those uniaxial SOCs and that general SOC, and I collected all of them. I can create an output by copying these PTs. I go back into my programmable report. I have so many open, just bear with me as I find it. There we go. So this has a macro built in. The macro will kind of look at all the terms that you found in your research bin that you exported and compare it against the data sets that you have, the PTs in your data set, and tell you with the green colors which one matches what the medical reviewer did manually. So just with this small bit of work that we did for like 10 minutes, just collecting PTs, we were able to match many of the cases, identify many of the cases that the medical reviewer had maybe taken quite a bit of time to identify because they had to review all of these cases one by one on a patient level. We can do it just by applying one macro and doing that research bin output. So I hope this kind of gives you a good idea of how to leverage Medra when you're using your review, your analysis, even if you don't understand coding, or even if you don't understand programming. You don't need to understand coding or programming. You can build your own queries and then approach the programmer to build you the macro. So I hope this was helpful. And just as a preview of what we're going to be talking about on May 22nd, Medra already has these kind of queries created for you. So if you change your view from system organ class to SMQs, and that's the topic for our next session, you're going to see there's 110 level 1 SMQs already created by Medra that speak to different areas of concern or different safety questions. And if I'm interested in, for example, heart failure, and I look up heart failure, it's going to tell me whether or not at the PT level, the heart failure is connected to an SMQ, and if so, which SMQ. So I see a heart failure connected on the right-hand side to something called cardiac failure. I can just find the cardiac failure SMQ. I can expand that, and already I have all of these different preferred terms collected together as a query ready for you to use. And not only that, you can input your data directly into the SMQ analysis tool and identify whether or not you have cases in your data set that matches the collected terms in this query. All right, so this really shows you how Medra is really a very strong tool that you can leverage in your data retrieval and your data analysis. But to build good queries, you do need team members who have the medical background to answer the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and team members who understand Medra to help you with building the query. And of course, because we do have granular levels in Medra in terms of large numbers of preferred terms across the 27 system organ classes, it does need patience. So you do need to invest some time when you first create the query if you don't have a query that's already built in Medra, but it's really worthwhile because it's really going to be helpful for your analysis. So we went over the topics of Medra data retrieval and presentation. We talked about the points to consider document and showed you where to retrieve it. We discussed the applications of Medra in the data retrieval, presentation, and analysis, and demoed how you can apply those while you're developing queries and analyzing data. And these are just some resources for you if you want to reach out to our help desk or access the 2 browsers that we showed you online. And of course, if you want to submit any change requests or access the training schedule. So I'm going to open it for Q&A. Hannah, any questions at this time?
I am not seeing any questions yet. We're just getting a couple comments that the demo was very useful, which is good to hear.
Okay, great. So I do hope that the level of information provided was not too overwhelming. You can always go back to the recorded session on YouTube and kind of walk through it again, test it out on your own, because when we don't have questions, it makes me wonder whether or not it wasn't clear. So I hope the instructions were useful. But if you do have questions afterwards, you can always reach out to our help desk team and they'll be able to assist you. They can always reach out to me as well, and I can provide response to you by email. But I'm happy to stay on a couple more minutes in case questions are coming in. Anything, Hannah?
Nothing yet, just yes, it was helpful, which is good to get that confirmation that the lack of questions isn't because it was too much.
Mhm. Well, one thing we are working on, which is a nice bit of information, is that some folks hesitate using our online tools, using their own data. Some folks hesitate, and some organizations try to avoid that. Even though we don't save the data, so even if you use our hierarchy tool or SMQ tool, we don't save the data at all. But we are working on an updated version of the desktop browser with these tools embedded, so that you can use them locally in your desktop. We're hoping by next year, so we'll see how that works out. But we are working on that as a next development. And one thing I would advise you is that please try out these tools. Please experiment by building a small query set. Please get a set of your own data, maybe 20, 30 adverse events, and run them through the hierarchy analysis tool and see if you can find a cluster of anything, maybe something you already know about, but a way to identify it. Because once you start experimenting with it, it becomes so much easier, and you can do it on your own. You don't need a programming background to do these kind of analyses and review using the tools that are available to you. And our documentation is very detailed in our website, so you can find instructions on the details of this, like we said in the PTC guideline document. It's very helpful. Okay, one last chance, Hannah. Any questions coming in?
No, we just got a couple thank yous, and someone said, yes, now I just need to practice.
Okay. Well, I'm glad people were on, because I was worried when we didn't have a lot of interaction with the folks accessing the polls. But I do hope that you found it helpful. And if so, if you're interested in the SMQs, please join us for our session on May 22nd. But with this, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to wish everybody a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining. Have a wonderful weekend ahead.